So the NBA, after locking up a nice lucrative deal with Amazon, NBC, and ESPN, we're all of a sudden hearing a push about the ratings from almost every major publication and podcaster. And we all gotta wonder why all of a sudden this is so much of a concern. And ironic enough, the same week that this has been a hot topic, the DeJounte Porter sentencing was supposed to be happening, but they pushed it back until 2025. And once again, even though the NBA has won the war with the TV deal, they're trying to win the PR battle. They're making a lot of changes to the All-Star game, trying to have it mean something. The Emirates Cup have very little relevance in Vegas. And at the same time, the NFL is creeping up on their Christmas real estate. They got Mariah Carey and Beyonce. So a lot of things are happening at once, but we're going to break this down layer by layer. And keep in mind that DeJounte Porter situation with the gambling is a major thorn in the league's side. He had gambling debts, and that's the reason why he compromised his career. And we're seeing the influx of money to major media outlets, to even regular everyday podcasts, where they're promoting different sports books. And that DeJounte Porter subject is a very kind of hot topic for them to touch on, because who wants to compromise one of their most lucrative ad partners? But we're going to peel these layers back slow, and let's check out what LeBron had to say about the current state of the league today.
Got to do something. Obviously, the last couple of years have not been a great All-Star game that Sunday night. But I mean, listen, it's a bigger conversation. It's not just the All-Star game. It's our game in general. Our game it's a lot of threes being shot. Mm-hmm. So it's a bigger conversation, just the All-Star game.
Again, Adam Silver has locked up these TV deals, but there's an uphill battle in the PR side of things. And the league right now is in a balancing act, because this three-point shooting is attached to all the international talent that's coming into the league. And that right there is also attached to making sure that talent pool flourishes, thus making the game have more global appeal across the world. It's almost as if you take out the more physicality that the American players are used to, it allows the international players to flourish. And that's where all the finesse and three-point shooting comes in. But the league and the media partners have had an issue even throughout the 80s with Hakeem Olajuwon after Michael Jordan had retired. They struggled to market the international star. And that right there is their conundrum. And right here, we're also going to hear from JJ Redick, where he gives great insight on some of the league's issues when it comes to marketing today's game.
There's a lot of probably whys. I would speculate some of it is streaming. Some of it is the fact that in my own household, we have YouTube TV and that we don't have Spectrum right now. We have Spectrum Wi-Fi, but not Spectrum cable. And my family can't watch Lakers games that aren't nationally televised. I do have a free account from Spectrum. I'm just too lazy to set it up. Clear on that. Spectrum has been very good to me.
You probably send somebody out there.
Yeah, but my point to that is, in my own household, I have 9 or 10 subscriptions. I lose my password to all of these. I think with the death of cable, people unplugging and then relying on streaming networks, I think it's not easy to watch an NBA game, to find an NBA game. I think that's part of it. Maybe that's a small percentage of it, but that's certainly a factor in all of this. I don't think we as, and by we, I was part of it, we as the sort of national partners have done a good job of storytelling, of celebrating the game. If I'm a casual fan and you tell me every time I turn on the television that the product sucks, well, I'm not gonna watch the product. And that's really what has happened over the last 10 to 15 years. I don't know why. It's not funny to me. Nothing is entertaining to me. This game should be celebrated. I've watched the league evolve. I'm in this league right now. I can tell you without fact, or with fact, that the league is more talented, and not just raw talent. The league is more talented and skilled than it was 18 years ago when I was drafted. That's a fact.
And he's right about that. It definitely is more talented and skilled, but the league, as well as their television partners, TNT and ESPN, have not marketed today's current game. all the changes that have been made, the way the players have adapted and increased their skills, that has not been marketed. The game today still gets marketed on some 1991 Michael Jordan versus everybody. And that's not happening. Even LeBron, as great as he is, he cannot overcome and just put everything on his back. All the teams that are super talented in today's league, and a lot of these teams today are deep. They're almost 7 to 8 guys deep with fully talented players who can impact the game.
There are more players that are excellent. There are more teams that are excellent. I heard when I played for, 4 or 5 years, well, why don't we even play the regular season? We know who's going to be in the finals. Well, guess what? We have parity now. And we're not celebrating parity. We're not celebrating the fact that the Western Conference is as loaded as it is.
Now, that parity, JJ is 100% correct on that. You can see by the different teams that have been in the NBA Finals, I would say in the last 5 years. But again, the NBA isn't marketing their league according to parity. They're still marketing their league according to the superstar. Come see LeBron and the Lakers. Come see SGA and the Oklahoma City Thunder. And when you market the league in that way, those stars at some point are going to have winning attached to their name. There's too many guys with brands out there and there's no winning attached to it. So in this parity era, the NBA might want to take a page out of the NFL's playbook.
We're playing a Sacramento team tonight that's incredible, with incredible talent, and they've got a losing record. It's not because they're a bad basketball team. I don't know. We don't have anybody that's willing to step up to the fact that this is an awesome game and we should talk about it and celebrate it in a positive way. That doesn't mean we don't critique it. We should critique it, but we should celebrate it. And nobody's doing that. And the people that are have a small niche following on Twitter.
Yeah, again, low-key JJ taking shots at the Inside the NBA crew and also certain pundits at ESPN. Who knows, maybe Pastor Perkins, aka Kendrick Perkins. But the NBA is going to have to be on the lookout for their media partners, as their business has turned into a personality-based business. As you see with Stephen A. Smith and the other big dogs at the network, guys like Pat McAfee, they're more personality-driven. And there's a lot of good that comes with it, but sometimes those personalities can clash with the branding of the league, as guys like Shaq have no problem shitting on today's current players. But again, as I stated earlier, the league is in an uphill PR battle, as a lot of money is flowing in. But like they always say, more money, more problems. And these are good problems for the NBA to have. And the NBA is facing a lot of pressure to perform in streaming. These streaming tech platforms that the games will be on are going to have analytics to not only measure how the audience is reacting to the game and who's tuning in, but they're going to have very specific ad-driven models built in to target certain audiences based off of what they like to buy, especially platforms like Amazon. That is their goal with them securing the NFL rights and also some of the NBA games. And it wouldn't be shocking if a lot of the media pressure we're hearing about the ratings is really coming down from some of these companies that just signed the NBA to these deals, especially NBC. They actually paid the NBA more money than they did for their NFL rights. These companies sometimes they apply pressure in different ways. We seen last season, right before the James Harden exit from Philadelphia, which really never gets talked about, was when TNT had their nationally televised game with the 76ers, how ESPN was making phone calls and asking why was James Harden sitting out that nationally televised game. We've never seen this before. These are supposed to be rival companies, but yet we've seen ESPN make phone calls, have Woj tweeting out articles about why James Harden was sitting out that nationally televised game, but this was a TNT broadcast. And fast forward today, we've seen these companies have no problem collaborating, as ESPN paid TNT to license their Inside the NBA show on their network. Under the eyes of tech, a lot of lines are blurred. Some of you fellas listening might work for a company and they have you sign paperwork before you join in that you can't join a rival company after you leave. But nowadays, a lot of these companies, they can be collaborators as well as rivals. So the lines are blurred. And speaking of lines being blurred, and this is where we tie things into the DeJounte Porter situation, as his sentencing was supposed to be the same week that the media is making such an issue about the NBA ratings, and no one really touched base on this because everyone has partnership with these sports books to promote and run ads on their podcasts, their nationally televised games, and that situation is an eyesore to the influx of money that's coming in. So with the media, the lines are also blurred. That DeJounte Porter story really reveals a lot of the inner workings to these gambling companies. Many of the sports books have collaborated, and they have third-party companies working for them, notifying them of unusual activity that's going across most of the sports books. Again, the lines are blurred. Just like ESPN working with TNT, all these sports books are in collaboration with each other to make sure the house remains on top. It's almost like the fast food chains, the eggs, the milk, some of the dairy products provided by the farmers. You don't think that's coming from the same places? Again, there's always checks and balances to make sure that the house always wins. And the third-party companies that look out for most of the sports books are the ones that notified not only the gambling companies, but also the NBA. So as this story unfolds, we're finding out that DeJounte Porter was in debt, and he compromised himself and the NBA to get out of his debt. And he's facing some serious charges. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He's facing anywhere from 5 to 20 years in prison. Woo. Oh man, I don't know if that was worth it, but the influx of money that's coming in through these sports books is undeniable. And more money, more problems. I think the sports leagues as well as the NBA, they're willing to just play it out and just deal with the consequences from day to day, month to month, year to year. And for those of you who love to put money down on some of these sports books, make no mistake about it. If you have a good consistency of just winning, they have analytics in place to actually probably show you different odds to actually put you in position to more than likely lose. And also don't be shocked if they don't, after a while, take in your bets. Maybe you try to put in a bet at a certain time and they end up saying, hey, there was an error. We didn't get your bet in time. There's there's checks and balances to make sure that the house remains on top. And we're seeing why this story really didn't get covered. And the NBA has implemented quite a few changes as far as parlay bets with players making under a certain amount of money. You can't really place those bets on guys that are, on the fringe of being out of the league, or guys on minimums, or guys probably not making over $30 million a year. So they're making their adjustments. And a lot of the NBA media, a lot of the sports media, everyone has Prize Pick ads, DraftKings ads, and they're not going to cover an NBA player who was already addicted to gambling, in debt, and then compromise the league. I'm telling you, Adam Silver really escaped a horrible story that will add to the PR blow the league has taken this week. Anybody would take the ratings argument over a former player who's been banned from the league just having gambling addiction and operating out of desperation to get out of this situation. So you fellas that love the parlays, just understand the house is not really built to lose. And unfortunately, we're going to hear many more stories like this. DeJounte Porter is not the only one. So former on-air ESPN talent Bomani Jones had touched base on something that I've always alluded to, that being the possibility of the gambling companies is really what's propping up these large media networks such as ESPN. Running these networks heading into streaming, which has not yet been proven profitable. It's hard to make the numbers work, but when you bring in the gambling dynamic, it does change quite a few things. But he gave great insight to the future of not only this dynamic playing out, but also the interaction of new sports fans that are coming of age, but yet their first interaction with these sports leagues is a financial incentive. But eventually, how will the interaction be if you take that financial incentive away? Bomani Jones was one of the few people at that network that wasn't afraid of being a shit starter. But he gave some great insight to this dynamic, as well as these networks navigating, promoting these leagues with at least somewhat healthy discourse while dealing with social media. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
I think the first thing that most of us would admit is at this point, we are at the mercy of the gambling. And that is it makes things very interesting when the money seems to all be coming from the same place. And the place that it's coming from to me is something that is sports adjacent, but I don't actually think is really that tied to why any of us got into this in the first place. Bob Costas made this point. I worked on his last show on HBO, and he did an essay where he made the point is that we're being flooded with all this stuff about gambling and sports, but none of us got into sports for the gambling. In fact, the people who are really into the gambling found the gambling after they got into the sports. So what is going to happen no matter what is the content is going to become more geared toward information that is useful for people who are making picks, right? That's where I think we're going to see more and more things go. We see on more and more television programs, more explicit picks conversation, right? And, baked in, made into fun features or things like that. But in the end, it's things to help people gamble. We're seeing it more in the actual broadcasting of the games. And if your content is not going to help people gamble, I don't know for how long people are going to be willing to pay for it. I'm curious what the demand now is from the consumer for things that are out of that direction. Because look, again, I don't think that any of us got into it for the gambling. I think that most sports fans are in it for stories. They are in it for their own regionalism. They're in it for their own nostalgia. They're still in it for those things. What I don't have a great handle on is what is the return on that content? How much money do the suits think they're going to be able to make for that content, or for how long are they going to be able to do it? Right now, I think things that are non-gambling related are pretty safe. I think as it goes, it's probably going to go more in that direction. But one thing I realized very quickly about this activity is if your plan is I'm going to do this and then I'm going to make some money, how do you think this place stays open, man?
Yep.
Right? That's not, if you're doing it for the ride. You're doing it for fun. If you're doing it because you think you're actually going to win, you are really doing this all wrong, which is what is so funny to me about the sports gambling content is that by and large, I think people are just kind of in it for the kicks and then they do it. I think that if you put up the records of all these people, I'm not sure anybody would care, right? Like I used to have a guy who come on my show and do the picks. And the reason I liked him is I thought that he was a much more representative gambler, which was because he lost a lot and went through emotional ups and downs in the process. I thought that ultimately made for better content. If it was going to be about gambling, it was going to be about what gambling really was, right? It wasn't just going to be gambling nerds that were getting everything right. No, you need to have some people who are kind of going through the dips and ups and downs of it to make it work. So I do agree with you and think that there's only but such a self-life on content that is around and related to gambling. And maybe what I'm thinking about is really more so the direction in which I see television going, which is kind of pushing itself around those sorts of things. But also in line with what I was saying, I still think people are into the other stuff about sports. I still think the things that bring people to the sports are much more visceral and emotional. And I don't have a great handle on what is a sustainable business model for media that allows people to produce that kind of work. As we're seeing the color around sports and the coverage of those sorts of things, we're seeing less and less of that, on top of the fact that in terms of like interviews and the likes and those things, we're now in competition with the people we cover. And that's maybe the most fascinating thing to me, is that we are trying to keep up with people who are not as good at doing our jobs as we are, but are way more famous than we are.
And that's a lane in itself with the athletes, especially the NBA players having their own podcasts. That is a lane in itself, because we get inside information normally that sometimes they don't even feel comfortable enough to reveal with the beat writers. But at the end of the day, we're not going to get many truths out of it, because they're just going to give their side of the story, and they're getting interviewed by other athletes in the same scenario as them. So they're given a lot of grace and they don't get any pushback. It's almost like when JJ Redick interviewed Ben Simmons, but never really asked him any real questions. After summer, we see him working on the jump shot, but yet every season it's not really effective. But yet he didn't get asked one question about his jump shot in over an hour discussion. That really is one of the main flaws of some of these athlete-driven podcasts. But at the end of the day, the media is struggling while entering streaming, which is not profitable yet. They're struggling with the patience of building up a storyline and not get caught up in the whole virality of just the online world, which is really short-lived for the most part. But there's definitely a struggle with how to promote these leagues, and we could see it play out no further than the NBA. That's why the storyline with the league's ratings dipping, you can see once it get a few clicks from a certain media outlet, everybody else picks it up. But there are better storylines than that, especially with the DeJounte Porter story, him supposing to be sentenced in the same week. But yet, it's almost as if the story with the NBA ratings has just gone too viral and everyone's trying to pick it up.
Who watches television these days? Like, I know I watch television because I have a little income to blow and a life that allows me to deduct all this cable that I get. So I just get all the channels, and I still think it's easier for me to flip up and down. I don't know how you program anything now because there is such a glut of available content, and it feels very replaceable. And I don't know how anything breaks through anymore, because I think the part about what goes viral is very important, because I'm surprised that we haven't seen a rise of more troll columnists, or not even troll columnists necessarily. I guess the column itself as an art form is kind of dying, but call it some level of contrarianism. So, like, for example, call it Jason Whitlock of 15 years ago or even 20 years ago, right? Not what he's doing right now. That's loaded to discuss. I'm just talking about when he was a sports writer who was really good at writing things that riled people up. Yep. I am surprised that we don't have more people who exist really in that space, because the algorithms have long rewarded, because people are attracted to online the things that make them mad. Those are the things that engage them at this point, are the things that let people blow off steam about it.
Once again, the sports networks as well as the leagues, they're navigating through this. When the NBA had collaborated with Twitter and sort of integrated their league with the platform, it was a beautiful symbiotic relationship. But what happens when the platform now goes under new ownership and they have a different sort of business model? They understand that the discourse is really what's getting the clicks. And normally the NBA storylines that take time throughout the season to build up, those stories get repressed through that algorithm.
A case in point, this year has been interesting in the world of my buddy Ta-Nehisi Coates, as he has written his book, The Message, that is pretty stridently critical of the Israeli regime. I've seen this bounce around and go, and we see it stoked up a lot of people on both sides, but there's obviously been a lot of anger that's been generated around that, and a lot of people with a lot of things to say about him. I feel like, and maybe this is a measure of recency bias, there's a greater virality, or there seems to have been a greater virality to that sort of reaction than there was to the overwhelmingly positive response to the case for reparations 10 years ago. Like 10 years ago, I felt like I could go in a lot of these spaces, and social media spaces in particular, and say something that people really, really, really liked, and that would catch fire, and that would give me places. I could point to examples, right? Like, I felt like that's how it felt at this point. In this day and age, I don't know if I could readily point to, like, what I could do that could be just so damn excellent that it'll get around in the same way as if somebody gets mad about something I say about Caitlin Clark.
And that right there is working perfect to the WNBA's advantage. Their league low-key gets the same sort of racial promotion as Larry Bird and Magic Johnson did in the 80s. And when it comes to the NBA today, it seems like the stories that kind of get pushed up, like the NBA ratings, it always has a level of discourse that sometimes could be politicized. We see people tying that into the NBA quote unquote being woke, or the fact that they don't like Adam Silver because his political views, or Greg Popovich. I've even seen some tie Steve Kerr into it because he showed up at one of the conventions. So a lot of entities beyond the sports world are picking up these articles and helping them to go viral, but they're using them to politicize their own agenda. And this just doesn't affect the online world. ESPN, make no mistake about it, they're looking at what's getting talked about online. But with them being on network television, they're trying to find what stories to pick up. And you could just see, though, from the way they cover the NBA, they really don't know what story to promote. The JJ Redick and the Lakers storyline kind of died down a bit, and they can't talk about the NBA ratings because that's their television partner, even though that story has gone viral. Them finding stories to promote the league, especially with these international talents, that normally does not translate too well with an American audience, and the lines are pretty much blurred right now. They don't know from which angle to attack this. It's almost as if the large networks that are supposed to appeal to everybody are struggling in an online world that really caters to the niche audience. Everyone has a tribe, but these large networks are supposed to appeal to everybody, and they're kind of struggling. You see it play out perfectly with the rival between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Drake doesn't really necessarily have a tribe. His tribe is popularity, which is fleeing. And Kendrick, because he has a tribe, the diss track that he released, Not Like Us, you see how much those words activated his tribe. Again, this is a very interesting space for these mega media conglomerates. It makes sense why we really haven't seen many pop stars as well as Hollywood megastars being generated in the last few years. The online world, aka the metaverse, is much more tribal than in the everyday universe.
The way I had explained it when my time was up at ESPN is that I am moving back toward the small room portion of my career, right? And that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's a different type of work that you're doing. And like, you get to the big rooms by nailing small rooms in most cases. Like, you figure out how to build a core audience, and you talk to them, and then they tell enough people how dope you are, and then somebody at a bigger place asks you to go there. But then once you're there, you're not serving your audience anymore. You're serving theirs. Like, that's the thing about working at ESPN that you kind of have to fundamentally understand. You can approach it however you choose to, but in the end, they're not bringing you so they could get your audience in large part. They may want your audience, like McAfee, for example. They wanted his audience, but by and large, they want you to come to serve their audience. And your content, of course, is going to change because the job is going to change.
Not necessarily. We see a clash with McAfee, also with his audience as well as the ESPN executives. There's definitely a clash in the way McAfee has flexed his power live on air. I don't know. Once again, a lot of this stuff is not really translating, and the more streaming becomes the dominant way people consume their media in the online world, the more these mega conglomerates like ESPN are going to struggle. They're going to have to adapt, and we already see them doing so. You can see the way they toned themselves down in this year's election, and also during their UFC pay-per-view. They see where their fan base really stands at, so they're not trying to offend either side of the political spectrum. It's like they're really trying to tap dance, but they have nowhere to go. They're stuck either way.
It could be a little more fun. It could be a little more warm. It could be a little more intimate when you're playing the small rooms. And I do think that the people at some point are going to get back to having a thirst for the real thing and a concern for the quality level of the content that they get or that they go for. That's where the athlete stuff becomes very interesting to me, because I don't see the numbers on those. Like, I don't feel like people like me and you are competing with them. We're competing with them in the sense that there's only 24 hours in a day, but they make a completely different sort of content that I don't know enough about what the audience wants from that content. Like, I think the old guys talking about the old days, I find that stuff to be very, very interesting. The young guys just up there talking, I don't find that to be interesting at all. But in the end, I do think that people want to see these figures scrutinized a little bit. They want some questions to be asked that could get people to places they don't necessarily want to go to on their own. I think a problem for media that we have to work on is that some of it is our fault, a lot of it is not. But the people don't trust us as much as we would like for them to trust us. Part of it is the media is an easy target because their heroes always don't like us, right? So,
nah, that's not it. We could see the agendas. The audience is smarter. I don't know if the media realize that. The same games that they play through the screen, the audience now, because of Instagram and other social media platforms, they project sort of some of these fake images. For example, on Instagram, everyone posts their highlights, their vacation clips, but no one posts their lowlights, when everyone in reality has lowlights. Even through the pandemic, no one posted any lowlights, but the whole world was kind of going through it. There were a lot of people dying. When you have situations like what played out with Dana White and his wife, him smacking the shit out of her, and ESPN is such an advocate for domestic violence, but yet they kept quiet about that, the audience sees right through it. They see right through it. And Bomani had said it himself. There's a thirst for authenticity That's why Kamala Harris struggled to appeal to a lot of people. She was way too robotic. Maybe that type of campaigning might have worked back in the 80s when people barely saw a presidential candidate, how their family looked like, or what they're doing in their off time. Now with social media, it's become its own reality show. We see the person 24/7. And if they're fake, we're going to see them be fake 24/7. So that distrust for the media comes from an audience that's pretty much hip to the game.
Like, the people we cover are the reason all of us are here. Okay. And so if the people you cover say they don't like you, then it just becomes, the media, right? Then you add in the political factors and all of that stuff. And then we wind up in a situation, to me, that's not dissimilar to what's happened to taxi drivers. So like in New York City, for example, you would much rather, all things being equal, take a taxi over taking an Uber, because a taxi driver is a professional. A taxi driver knows what to do if this, that, or the third is happening. Like, yeah, everybody's got GPS or whatever, but if you're running late to go to the airport, you want to get in and tell a taxi driver you're running late, he'll get you to the fucking airport. You tell this regular dude that, I'm running late to get there, that's not going the same way. But the taxi drivers, especially in New York, had treated people so bad for so long that nobody has any measure of sympathy for what's happened to the values of their medallions, everything, all these things where they thought they were set for life, and now they're scrambling and trying to figure this out. And people don't care because they feel like they have been mistreated. All the times they blew past you in the rain and when they didn't have anybody in the back, it all came to roost in this moment. And so
that's facts. I've experienced it myself in New York City, but this is very relatable to ESPN. They've overcharged everyone on their cable bills, and it got to a point where most people had enough. And fuck it, even the old lady down the street who doesn't even watch sports is sick of paying a high cable bill because ESPN wants to up their package. So nobody's definitely going to feel sorry for them.
The fact that they're better doesn't matter in a lot of people's minds. I think that a lot of people believe that we in media are disingenuous and have these poor intentions and everything else. And so their heroes who have been telling them that are like, well, don't worry, we'll ask each other the questions. And then they'll go over there and listen to the guys ask each other the questions. And this is where I'm like, I need to see the numbers, because I'm just not sure in a lot of these cases how you could possibly, there's only 24 hours in a day. How can you listen to all these podcasts? I have no idea. But I don't find those interesting. And it goes outside of sports. Harper's Bazaar just has a cover story with Kendrick Lamar being interviewed by SZA. And there's no way in the world you're going to tell me that the best interview that you can get out of Kendrick Lamar comes from SZA. But you can tell me that Kendrick Lamar might show up and say, I'll do this if I talk to SZA.
It shows you how much the media is losing their leverage. But at the same time, there's still a space for them, because interviews like that among celebrities with each other, they're not going to ask the serious questions. And there is definitely a thirst for it. But these are interesting times, because no matter how big of a sports network or just a media network that you are, you're still going to have to go through a middleman, which is social media, to reach the audience. And social media is going to choose what it wants to promote. And it's automatically set on promoting the things you put out that create discourse. In a way, these media institutions may have to strike a deal with Twitter, Instagram themselves, so they can get a leg up on what to push. And this is really causing the storylines throughout sports to kind of get lost. We've seen SGA and Oklahoma City Thunder make the Emirates Cup final, but yet the casual NBA audience wasn't quite ready for it because there's been no buildup on the media side. But any attempt for them to build up SGA's profile to the casual NBA fan, and I emphasize that, the casuals, just like how the casuals know Michael Jordan, LeBron, Kobe, but for them to know SGA, there has to be a buildup, and that buildup normally happens through the storylines, but those storylines sometimes might be too boring for the social media platforms, so they get pushed down. It's an interesting dynamic, but the NBA has a long way to go when it comes to promoting their upcoming stars.